Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very happy today to recognize some familiar faces. We worked together at the annual conference, and that was on the collaboration between perpetrator programs and probation. And we have been exchanging sort of ideas and contributions reciprocally for some time now. So it's with great pleasure that I get to actually present and meet with some of you. I'm going to share some slides. So as Wilhelm was saying, we are a European network. We have about over 60 members from more than 30 European countries. We started as an informal network in 2009, and we were formally structured in 2014. Our funding comes mainly from the European Commission, Oak Foundation, and membership contributions. Our scope started as a network that exchanged practices and has developed over the years quite a bit. I would say that now our main aim is that of supporting knowledge of why perpetrator programs are important, but also what they are. We've been working so long on perpetrator programs, but actually in many instances, there is a problem really of knowledge of these programs. Very little is known about this. Also, we work on supporting an approach that is accountability centered to stopping men's violence, and also focused on the protection of victims, mainly women and children. We also are very committed to providing resources, advanced knowledge and trainings for experts working in the field, providing networking experiences for our members, developing guidelines and supporting reflections on critical issues in the field, developing trainings. And also I was very interested in hearing about the evaluation, because that is one of our focus areas. We have been, over the past 6 years, developing an international framework for the evaluation and quality of perpetrator programs with a comparable platform, which is the Impact Toolkit that is now being rolled out in many European countries, and it has really picked up in the past year and a half. So now we should be, in the course of the next year, gathering some very relevant and interesting data on that. Our network is composed mainly of organizations that are working directly or indirectly with people that perpetrate violence. So we have both perpetrator programs and women's support services. We also have researchers, some umbrella organizations, and some research departments. This is sort of briefly who we are. I've been, as Wilhelm said, the executive director of this organization since 2017, but I come from the field of working with perpetrators as well as work with victims. In terms of the presentation that I'm going to be giving today, I thought that it would be interesting to share 3 aspects of the work that we've been doing over the course of the past year. So mainly sort of how we are dealing with, how our members are dealing with, and how we're trying to create theoretical frameworks for the work during the COVID-19 situation. So my presentation will be in 3 parts. In the first part, I would like to tell you a little bit about the issuing of the guidelines to working with perpetrators in the COVID-19 crisis that we issued at the end of March of 2020. And then I would like to focus on specific forms of violence that have increased during the lockdown in the area of cyber violence. And then the last part of my presentation will be on lesson learned and critical issues. And that is something that we are undergoing now that has to do with the revision of the guidelines and steps going ahead, and how we are further going to develop the recommendations. Obviously, if there are any questions or comments, please interrupt me at any time. I'm more than glad to interact on any of this. So, the guidelines for the COVID-19 crisis. When the first lockdown started in the 8th of March of 2020, being a European organization, we immediately got caught with some of our member organizations that had very sudden lockdowns. And specifically, since I am the president of the Italian National Network, but also run a small program here in Florence, actually not so small, but a program here in Florence, we were faced with shutting down perpetrator programs from a day to the next, with no possibility to do any preparation work, and absolutely completely unprepared. Also facing a very uncertainty in terms of how long the lockdown was going to last. And all of us thought at the beginning of this pandemic, we were thinking in terms of weeks. Okay, well, you shut everything down. I mean, schools including, you can't really shut schools down for more than a couple of weeks. So the way that we entered into this was, little did we know of what was then going to be developing. For this reason, we tried to address both issues that were related to the preparation phase of going into lockdown, as the effective intervention of how to work once the perpetrator programs were locked down. And obviously, we had different European, now, I mean, looking at it from now, we had different countries facing different levels of lockdown, situation that has been almost inverted with the second wave of COVID, in which countries that had done stricter lockdowns in the first phase are now having less strict, and other countries that had less strict lockdowns are going the other way around. So anyways, these considerations were obviously really relevant. So we were trying to give input for preparing everybody to be prepared for anything. There were obviously, as all of we know, as soon as the lockdown started, all of us that were engaged in the area of domestic violence were very concerned. We knew that there were a series of risk factors, major stressors for family, unemployment, children at home not going to school, that we thought would be very critical for situations of domestic violence, and possibly leading to an increase in violence. Also, there were questions around, was it possible to use normal curricular activities? These were many of the questions that the programs were asking. So this was a part of the challenges and the work that we did with the preparation. There also, once sort of this aspect was considered, the need to prioritize the safety of those who were affected by the violence. So identifying the correct level of risk and what kind of intervention could be recommended for different levels of risk. And the first major consideration that we had was that we didn't feel that recommending to just start any kind of intervention would guarantee the necessary levels of safety for victims. And so we recommended within these guidelines a crisis management approach. The crisis management approach, as opposed to behavioral change program, has different goals. Our goals were that of reducing the risk, decreasing the perpetrator's stress, increasing his coping mechanism, mitigating the effects of the violence on family members, and also at the same time trying to maintain contact with the survivors' voices and informing practices also based on the feedback that we were getting from victims. So within the crisis intervention, we were really more focused on providing support, facilitating emotional release, and increasing coping skills, which are partly overlapped with things that we might do in behavioral change programs, but partly is different, and did not deal as much with sort of accountability issues and holding the men responsible for the violence and a lot of the aspects that are crucial to change, but we thought we couldn't assure an adequate level of safety, at least in the first part of the lockdown. There were some general rules. Service providers were absolutely unprepared to have sort of this mix of personal and professional life going on in terms of using different media, being at home. And so we tried to also support a reflection on this and maintaining healthy boundaries or healthy enough boundaries for the work that they were undertaking. So in terms of the intervention that we recommended, it started from the risk assessment, and risk assessment had a slightly different characterization given lockdown situation. Situations that may have been, for example, high risk in non-lockdown situation when, for example, the woman and the perpetrator were living separate. If there was a total lockdown, that situation might actually be safer. So in the light of the kind of situations that happen, we went through this flow chart to try and identify different levels of risk and different recommendations depending on the level of risk. So we had A, B, C, D in terms of recommendation of intervention and depending on the risk level. The higher the risk, the more intense the support with different concerns. And so I'm not going to go through these specifically because we don't really have time to look at each of these. Obviously, the guidelines are published on our website, so anybody is interested in having a closer look on that can just look it up on our website, or I can send them if you want me at the end, if you want at the end of the presentation, together with the presentation that I will be leaving for you. So we had the different indications depending on the level of risk. In some cases, online activities also were possible. Basically, we advised against new intake in this phase. So perpetrator programs were working mostly with perpetrators that were already in the program. We came out with these guidelines at the end of March last year. So the kind of feedback that we had was from the partners was not extremely extensive, but most partners were very relieved that the men were still being followed by the perpetrator programs. There was sort of a setup in which they were pre-contacted via message to make sure that they felt okay talking, and they could arrange to discuss their feedback. They often had concerns about the job instability and the major challenge with that of the managing of children, homeschooling, and the pressures that was bringing on the family situation. So this was another element that supported that we continue supporting perpetrators throughout the COVID-19 crisis. So I'm going to come back to what we now are looking at and what our considerations after a year's time. I just sort of wanted to give you this lay of the ground because this is sort of our starting point, I think, collective starting point in terms of what happened at the beginning of pandemic. However, now there are different reflections that are being made obviously after a year. I wanted to pass to the second issue that has to do with the forms of cyber violence that increased and that became more visible during the pandemic. Since so much of the work and since so much of our life has passed online and is mediated through our electronic devices, and since we know that power and control is such an central issue for perpetrators of domestic violence, it shouldn't have been surprising to discover that the use of stalkerware increased. And specifically, we were appalled to discover what was happening with stalkerware. Stalkerware is a software that is made available directly to individuals and that enables a remote user to monitor the activities of another user's device without the other user's consent and without explicit persistent notification to the users. And this allows for total control of everything that is happening on the partner's phone. So the kind of features that you find in stalkerware are tracking, monitoring, recording videos and voice. You can steal phone logs, accessing social media and messengers, reading browser data. So practically any and all of the activities online. And in case you are wondering how they sort of fit with different kinds of controlling devices, stalkerware is different from malicious spy programs that are usually installed using exploits and social engineering and are illegal. Cannot be easily found on the internet and are usually used by attackers who have their own servers. Stalkerware is incredibly easy to come by, and I will tell you a little bit more about that. It has to be manually installed by a person who has physical access to the phone. And in most countries, the legal status of stalkerware remains vague. It can be easily found on the internet, and it supplies various services. I have here. No. Here. This is an ad for stalkerware. So basically, you can even by Control My Partner, it's actually advertised also for controlling partners. You can come up with an ad like this, basically, see here, for $39.99. Just like you would download an app for doing yoga, for example, deciding if you want to do it every day or once a week or once a month, different profiles allows you to have different levels of control. If you have trouble installing it because it's too techy, here, as you see how it works, there's a live chat with a technician to begin the rooting and jailbreak the process to get it onto your partner's phone. Or they also offer a service, as you see, or buy a phone with FlexiSpy pre-installed. So you can buy the phone or the tablet with the pre-installed software and then give it as a wonderful present to your partner and then be able to control her. Stalkerware is also different from parental control because parental control imposes communicating persistent notification to the user that the parental control is happening. So it is visible, it shows its presence, and it has persistent notification. Stalkerware, on the other hand, once it's been installed, it disappears from the apps. It's not something that you can easily find, and it gives absolutely no notifications of the activities that it's doing. It is advertised in an ambiguous way, sometimes as phone monitoring for parents and employers, other times also advertised as a direct possibility of controlling somebody's devices. And it sells for a mean promotional price for 24 euros a month. So that is also, it's a very cheap. As I was mentioning, the stalkerware is installed by having access, physical access to the phone of the partner, and that is the only complicated thing. However, obviously with partners living together, that isn't even so complicated because all you need to have is physical access to your partner's phone or tablet or whatever. The numbers are frightening. More than 37,000 euros. And this is only the numbers that come from Kaspersky's collection of numbers, because we still have sort of a quite gray area of numbers. And this is depending on the use in different countries. As you can see, Italy and Germany have a very high level of use, followed by France and Spain, and also the UK. And this is definitely a phenomenon that's on the rise and that has increased with the lockdown, with the fact that all activities are online, and with the perpetrators' need to control even more thoroughly their victims. During this period, we made a little volume on cyber violence, working with perpetrators. We're trying to increase our members' capability of screening for this kind of behavior in men, and also in including these activities in the groups, because our experience was that perpetrator programs were the service providers of perpetrator programs were completely unprepared. They didn't know at all that this was happening. They didn't know the extent. They didn't know how it worked. So also for this reason, we have been promoting webinars and this manual and other activities with our members and outside. Now, last but not least, to the third part of my presentation that is related to reflections after a year of the COVID-19 situation within the practice in perpetrator programs. The reflection is on, we issued, as I was saying before, the guidelines recommending crisis intervention. This obviously happened for the first few months, but then different programs started to do different things. Obviously, we went through different levels of lockdown. In certain countries, perpetrator programs were considered essential workers, so they could continue to do mostly individual work. So again, there were changes from group work to individual group, and for some practitioners, other practitioners had to stay online, were mainly online. Some of them had activities both online and offline. Some practitioners were working mainly on phone or in individual sessions. So there was an extreme variety of how these programs continued to develop. However, any intervention that lasts a year, including an ongoing one-year crisis intervention, becomes an intervention in itself. And so we felt the need to reassess what was happening with perpetrator programs and to start looking at the work that we have been doing with perpetrators over the course of the past year in terms of an intervention, because whatever we've been doing it for a very long time. So we have to see how this, and if it's affected change and what has been going on. When we started working with 4 main areas with focus groups with our members, we had different groups reflecting on online individual counseling, online group counseling, and in-person individual counseling. And some of these programs had brief periods online, and also what the feedback from victims was around these different areas. What we are seeing is that there has been a number of very, very interesting practices in terms of how perpetrator program service providers have transformed their working materials, both to fit the online format, how they're working with groups online, how their intervention also is changing, what they feel is being well covered through these interventions, what are the critical aspects of that. And again, always keeping in mind the issue of safety of children and victims, and how do we assure that, and how is that faring throughout this period. One interesting aspect that we had of feedback from partners throughout the pandemic of the perpetrators that were in perpetrator programs was that there was often a decrease in the physical violence. The physical violence did not seem to be a concern for the partners. There continued to be issues around, especially the children and tensions around parenting aspects, but in some cases the external threat of the virus and of having sort of a very scary outside world actually cemented somehow the relationship in ways that was not affecting negatively the violence. This is just sort of a very brief, just some ideas, because this is the work in progress that we're working on now. We are both reflecting on the framework of intervention over a year, and basically inviting and asking programs to look at what they've done over the past year with perpetrators as a form of intervention, and what do they think has changed, and what do they think they need to integrate. Also, we are encouraging perpetrator programs to look at this period as the unique period it is. I mean, we cannot really apply different forms of evaluation or different forms of outcome, and at a European level even less so, because each program, not even each country, within each country, different regions, different programs within the same regions have had such different experiences and have been doing such different practices that it's very much based on the evaluations that service providers are giving, and they are pretty much navigating by sight on this. And so to look at the whole period of time that they've been working and trying to see what is going to be needed to integrate the pattern of change that they've seen with the men over the past years. So the four areas among which we are gathering these questions are challenges, recommendations, open questions, or risky assumptions, because we also found some of those, and opportunities. Opportunities is the area of interesting things we've discovered that we probably will want to reflect on and maybe continue also after the pandemic is over. So in terms of challenges, these are just a few examples. Obviously, we've collected a lot of them. So one of the challenges is keeping contact with partners safe when we're doing partner contact. How are we able to ensure safety for her? Or ensuring confidentiality when online. How do we at the same time give this online support but assure that it holds confidential, both for the man but also for the other men that might be in a group if we're having a group. Some of the recommendations, online interventions, often a very concrete possibility of giving support to men in their homes. Also, what service providers have said, that it's really important to prepare specific materials that engage emotionally online, using videos, a lot of breakup rooms, play roles, so changing the methodology and adapting it to the online format. There are actually some things that seem to work even better online. Some of the open questions or risky assumption is the necessity of adapting the materials, sort of links to what I was saying about sort of engaging emotionally, using live techniques, not using readings, for example, because they become just very heavy online. Risky assumption, one of the assumptions that we found where service providers are very shy of using online support, they are using phone contact, but we have some questions around why would phone contact actually be any safer than the online. I think that there's some reflections around the same things hold true for phone contact in terms of confidentiality, in terms of the partner hearing what he's saying. All those issues that are true for the online format may be just as true for the phone contact. So that's one of the question marks that we are going to be highlighting. Some of the opportunities, men seem to respond highly to the service providers because they're also struggling with the same things. The fact of being connected created in many cases an intimate setting. Also, for certain perpetrators, it allowed to create, these are perpetrators that probably would have never accessed the program directly, but going through the online allowed them to find out a little bit more what it was like and to feel more secure, and then to actually be able to access the program. And sometimes men are more relaxed in their homes, and you have a more authentic idea of what they're thinking and of their surroundings. So this is, I'm going to stop here. We are going to be issuing these new revised guidelines probably by the mid or end of March. So stay tuned for some more. If you found that was interesting, we have a lot of other things coming up. And then obviously you can find all the resources of WWP on our website and with all our social media. So thank you very much.